I wanted to do the biotech revolution. As Margaret knows so well from her great work on the intellectual property involved in the biotech revolution, this is the revolution that will most change our time. It'll be more important even than the digital revolution because besides hacking the code of digital codes and giving us things like iPhones, we'll be able to combine that with the ability to read and even rewrite the code of life, using our genetic code. So I was looking for a way into it. And as you know, RNA has turned out to be the more important molecule. RNA is at the heart of these vaccines we're all hoping to get. And RNA is at the heart of CRISPR, which is this gene editing technology. And so I was looking for a way into that story. Back in 2000, all the men in biology were kind of focused on DNA, the Human Genome Project, sequencing the human genome of DNA. But a group of women who had almost been excluded from the Human Genome Project a bit, there's a lot of alpha males running it, focused on RNA, and that was Jillian Banfield, Jennifer Doudna, Emmanuel Charpentier. I could go on. And it turns out that RNA, is not as famous as its sibling DNA, but like a lot of siblings with, famous brothers or sisters, it does more of the work. It actually takes the code and builds the protein in our cell, such as a mimic of the spike protein for coronavirus, if that's what we tell a vaccine we want to do. It also can cut DNA. And so that's what we do with gene editing tools. So Jennifer Doudna discovers the structure of RNA, discovers how it can replicate itself, and it was the molecule that begins life on the planet. And she had read the double helix and had studied Rosalind Franklin, who was the woman there who had done the work that allowed Watson and Crick to understand the structure of DNA. And so through her life, I get to look at RNA, and then she and Emmanuel Charpentier are the ones who invent this tool for editing our genes. And then finally, she decides she has to take on the moral issues, the humanity issues of how should we use this. Those of us who are in boardrooms like yourself and everybody else on this call know that even when you get, some product or some idea that's going to work, you do pause at a certain point and say, how can we make sure this does for good, but doesn't cause any harm?
You know, her being a woman probably mattered in terms of how she worked. And I know throughout the book, there's a big emphasis on the team aspect of it. What did you learn about, kind of the process of how she went about this, and why maybe having her be the person who was fascinated by this made this happen perhaps in less time than had she been a man? What were the things that she brought to it in terms of the way that she collaborated and worked that may be a lesson as we think about diversity and why diversity matters in the boardroom and elsewhere?
Yes, I don't want to generalize, but I do tell the specific story in which she's a great team builder. And when I watched at how she built teams, she made sure that everybody who came into her lab or into the company she was working on met everybody else and they got along, that they kind of clicked, that they were able to be very collegial with one another. And I said, well, some people I know who are great leaders, they don't like that. They're like Franklin Roosevelt or whatever. They like having creative tension. They like having people, with sharp elbows fighting each other because they think that leads perhaps to more innovation. She said, I get that totally, but that's not who I am. I believe in teamwork and collegiality and people having each other's back, working hand in glove instead of, always trying to best their own colleagues. And I think we need different ways of collegiality, different ways of competition. When you're on a board, you don't just look at who's the CEO, you look at the team a CEO has built. And each CEO has a different style. Sometimes they want creative tension, but in Jennifer's case, she wanted collegiality. And that does lead with her working in a transatlantic collaboration with Emmanuel Charpentier, but also graduate students who are in Vienna and one up in Sweden and other places. They're able to collaborate, working 24 hours a day because they're all in different time zones, to win the race to discover how CRISPR works as a gene editing tool. And I once asked Steve Jobs, late in life, his life, what was the best product he ever made? And I thought he'd say maybe the original Macintosh or maybe the iPhone. He said, no, making products like that is hard. But what's particularly important is making a team that can continue to make products like that. And he said, the best thing I ever did was make the team at Apple. And so in that book, I look at how you have Johnny Ive, a great designer, but somebody who's a great industrial engineer who can take Johnny Ive's wacky ideas and see if you can make them work. And somebody like Eddie Q, who handles things like the content. So I began to see that teamwork was the thing. And when I wrote about Benjamin Franklin a while back, that may be one of the great teams ever put together, which is the whole team of our founders and their families. But you needed a person of great rectitude like George Washington. You needed really smart people like Jefferson and Madison. You needed people of high passion like, uh, Samuel Adams and his cousin John. But you also needed somebody who could make teams, and that's what Ben Franklin did. And so when I wrote about Jennifer Doudna, I didn't just write about her scientific ability. I wrote about her collaborative and team-making ability, and most important, how to be collaborative and competitive at the same time. Anybody who's on a business board knows, this notion of a frenemy or a co-opetition or something where where you're Apple and you're cooperating half the time with Microsoft and you're competing half the time. That's the hardest thing to do. We all know how to collaborate. We probably all know how to compete. But what Jennifer Doudna's life story teaches us is how do you interweave the two?